Nettie, is that how you say this? Marinetti, you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, did I say that right? Marinetti, is that right?
Yeah, Marinetti.
Hey, welcome.
Hey, so I wanted to talk because I was watching your discussion yesterday with the Jewish guy. Yeah, if you remember that.
Yeah, the Nazi.
Um, I don't think you can be Jewish and a Nazi, but yes, yes.
He's
And you
he's
said you're a
wait, no,
social
he said he's
democrat.
a Nazi. That's what he said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all debate. But you said you're a social democrat. Is that correct?
No, but I think like that's probably what I'm close. I wouldn't consider myself anything, but I think that I find myself like if there was a party, social democratic party, I'd probably be most closely aligned with them. Yeah,
Okay, so you believe in some form of restrained capitalism.
for
Am I
sure.
correct in saying that?
Certainly.
Okay. Okay. I'm a socialist, so that's kind of why I came wanted to discuss.
Sure.
Okay. So can you kind of outline why you support why you support capitalism? Give me a reason.
I don't. That I just view things a little differently. I think maybe this sometimes this conversation doesn't really go anywhere. The reality is we live in a country with 330 million people, and most of the people are either proclaimed capitalists. They might believe in it, but most of them are afraid of socialism. So I think that you kind of have to create a system. I wouldn't say the best of both worlds, but you're going to have to evolve. And I like systems that are adaptable and that are where change is acceptable. So, like drilling down to one ideology, I think every time somebody tries to do that, it winds up being bastardized.
Okay, that's fair. Um, my kind of just my kind of opening statement would be that we see the function of socialist planned economies. We see their successes in places like the Soviet Union and China. We before this truth looks up. Before the Soviet Union, only about 10% of the entire Russian population could read. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And yet, within about 15 years, it went from that to sending a man, into space, from to being a world superpower, essentially. So that should be kind of enough argument that kind of economic planification works much better than, it's certainly better than feudalism, but better than kind of the exploitative kind of international capitalism you support. Because if we look at China
I don't think there's a
during the
connection
Chinese
there.
Civil War,
I don't think you're drawing a connection that works. I don't think saying that the literacy rate was low and then 15 years later they had space travel. I don't think that you'd have to do more work to convince me that those two things mean that socialism works.
well, that was just kind of an example, but the core point is that we see in, for example, the feudal backwater that was China, the development of socialism turned into arguably the best economy in the world, and we saw in the Soviet Union they went from a country where most people were still essentially slaves, they were serfs, right? Where they couldn't read, they couldn't write, they died. I think the life expectancy was in the 50s. To a country with some of the best healthcare in the world, with the strongest economy in the world, that made constant strides in technology, and we can point that to the fact that the USSR's government, the Politburo, controlled the economy there,
But
right?
and then what happened?
And then what happened? It collapsed because of foreign influence.
Uh, I don't yeah. And then what happened?
And now, well, when the Soviet Union formally collapsed, and it was already collapsing before that point, that's kind of a whole other story. They installed Yeltsin. Yeltsin probably wouldn't have won if it wasn't for US backing, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And Yeltsin's economic policies, which were the sort of neoliberal social democrat policies you would support, didn't it destroyed the country essentially. It turned
What
the
what
Soviet
what would
Union
that
and
have to
its
do
former
with
state.
what would that have to do with social democrat policies? Social democrat just essentially means that if you're going to use if you're going to, I mean, that you believe in like a strong safety net, and that you also believe in democracy. You could have a social democracy that's heavy on socialism. You could have it that's light on socialism.
Well,
I think the democracy
um,
part is the democracy part is the part that I like. I don't like the absence of democracy that comes with communism. Oftentimes gets bastardized by socialism. I mean, like Hitler said he was a socialist, even though in practice he wasn't. He used that ideology to get people to abandon their voice democratically, and then he ruled. The thing that I like about democracy is that at least it stands at times as a barrier uh, to authoritarianism. That's why I like democracy. I'm always concerned when somebody says socialism works, communism works, capitalism works. I think all of those things all can easily be toppled if you don't have democracy.
well, you say democracy is good, but the problem with democracy, especially, there's kind of a correlation between the amount of people, and in my eyes at least, because the problem with democracy is that you're relying on kind of mob rule, right?
Yeah,
And that's not a good thing because the average person, by their own admission, there have been studies done which show that, the kind of political literacy, of the average voter in the US, for example, is atrocious. They probably couldn't even tell you what a tariff is. They just know that it's good or bad depending on what Fox News tells them.
yeah, but people want a voice. Like, I think the problem with this discussion is like if you want to say that people are financially illiterate or politically illiterate, I would agree with that. But people want a voice, and when you take that voice away from them, or you say that that voice is being taken away from them, they tend to venture into authoritarianism. They tend to see authoritarianism as the only is their only way out. The clip I played earlier of the Republicans now saying like they don't want democracy anymore. There's like, well, we're a republic, we're not democratic, we don't want direct democracy. They're saying the same thing you're saying. They're saying the people are too stupid to vote. And so we're going to drift towards authoritarianism. That's why I like democracy. It's a protection against authoritarianism. And yeah, you're going to be slow to progress a lot. In fact, it slows progress certainly. And it slows social progress, it slows economic progress, but it acts as a barrier against authoritarianism, which almost always ends in a country imploding. So I like democracy as a barrier against authoritarianism.
Well, okay, you say you clearly don't like authoritarianism, but let me ask you why. Can you give me like a historical example or?
Sure. I mean, like I grew up in a cult, so I don't like authoritarianism in that way. I think that authoritarians tend Hitler's a good example. I know, just because we have more of his history, but what happened in Germany, it wasn't like everybody's like, hey, let's exterminate Jewish people. Hitler wrote a book that was like, hey, I want to exterminate Jewish people. And then he like publicly said, I want to exterminate Jewish people. And yet the people of Germany that were in the Nazi party were like, nah, he doesn't really mean it. And then they just turned a blind eye. And then when Hitler got in control, he's like, hey, I can't do the things that I need to do if we have all these other parties standing in the way. So he aligned with the church and he aligned with the big businesses, and they basically said, yeah, you can have full control. And then genocide happened, and it happened so quick. So,
Uh, I mean, okay, well, if you look at, for example, let's use Germany as an example here. If you look at the democratic institutions that were kind of forced upon Germany by the Treaty of Versailles, the country, because of those, was terrible. It had hyperinflation, it had corruption. There were reportedly child brothels in Berlin.
yeah. And
Uh,
Hitler used all of that angst to convince the whole country to give him control. And once he got control, did he fix that? No, he entered another war and committed a genocide against the Jewish people. That's exactly the point. Is that they had real problems, and when you don't have democracy, when your country tries to solve real problems, a lot of people, the same exact people, are politically illiterate, so they don't know when authoritarian is lying to them either. So democracy protects you a little bit more from that authoritarian control. Clearly, we see that when countries are having a hard time, when countries are going through turmoil, they turn to dictators, they turn to authoritarians, and it never works. It always ends in disaster.
well, okay. with the German example, it did work though. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and defend everything Hitler did. I'm not a Hitlerite, but if you look at the kind of drastic shift from 1930 to 1936, that's 6 years. Hitler took power in 1933. He was essentially in power since like 32, 31, but that's a whole other story. You know, he rearmed a country that was defanged. He strengthened national pride. People hated Germany. He strengthened the government, right? People were
How?
finally, for once,
Wait, how
proud to be
though?
German
Wait, how did he do that?
because he got rid of democracy and he got rid of the degenerate liberal system that was implemented.
Dude, you're calling. He did a genocide.
I'm not, like I said, I'm not a Hitlerite. I don't defend that.
You
I
said he
mean, he was
fixed
kind of.
his way of fixing degeneracy was to do a genocide, to kill
No, I
to kill
never mentioned
LG.
the Holocaust.
You said degenerate. The Holocaust wasn't just Jewish people. It was also gay people. It was also trans people.
I know,
It was
I'm
also
gay.
atheists. It was those who promoted like sexual freedom.
Well, I mean, I'm not defending that. I mean,
You're
I'm
defend.
gay. Why would I defend?
I don't know. I don't know if you're defending it, but what you said is he got rid of degeneracy. What's degeneracy?
Degeneracy is. I was using degeneracy in that context to refer to the liberal system that kind of destroyed Germany. You know, it was
How,
forced upon them and it destroyed it,
how
you
did
know,
it destroy Germany?
it turned what was possibly the mightiest country in the world into, you know, a country where you needed to bring over 1 million Reichsmark banknotes to buy a fucking loaf of bread.
You don't think
Uh,
that had anything to do with World War One?
that had to do with the fact that they were economically encircled, that they, you know, that they lost, for example, the Saarland. France forcefully took the Saarland
In a
from them,
war,
which was where the
yeah, a
coal mines
war.
were.
It was a war. They lost a war. That's why they were hurting. I mean, look,
Yeah, and the
with
liberal.
all due respect, like this is exactly what I'm talking about. People came out of World War One and they were disillusioned with the German government, and then they said, "We'll hand it over to this guy who claims he's a socialist," and he didn't turn out to be a socialist. And then he just ran the country into the ground, put him into another world war, genocided the Jewish people, tried to genocide the LGBTQ folks, and you're like, yeah, this is a good example because for a couple of years there was some economic prosperity.
I mean, the lack of economic prosperity that, you know, happened when World War II began. That was because World War II began. I mean, they were encircled. They, you know, didn't have the resources necessary. Like I said, I'm not defending Hitler. In my kind of ideal world, he would have probably stopped at the Sudetenland because there wasn't really many Germans to unify after that point.
I don't think you're making a compelling case for socialism using this argument. Honestly, I think you're making my case that very quickly, if you allow if you allow an authoritarian who claims to have the same views as you take control, like very quickly you find yourself in a position where people are being genocided.
Well, the genocide. I mean, let's, you know, kind of keep on the Hitler thing. The genocide. I mean, Hitler originally wanted to send them to Israel and Madagascar.
I don't care what he was said he was going to do. I don't. I believe it or
No,
not.
he tried doing this.
Believe Yeah, and then he couldn't, and
It
so he
was only
sent
the
them.
UK.
So he sent them to Poland, right?
He sent them to Poland, and the Polish
And
government refused to evacuate them. They could have gone
oh, it was the Poles. It
to.
wasn't Hitler's fault. It was the Poles. The Poles, dude. You're a
No,
Hitler apologist. What the fuck are you talking about right now? You're such an
I'm.
apologist. You keep saying like I'm not for. You're a Hitler apologist. You are trying to soften Hitler right now. Just be honest. I don't know why people are so dishonest when they come up here about what their real views are. You're a Hitler apologist.
Well, I'm a Strasserite, and Strasserites are anti-Hitler, and one of the reasons they're
Wait, but
anti-Hitler
you're
is I've been
being an
trying to
I don't
explain
care.
to you.
Wait, but you're being
Well,
apologetic. You're engaging in apologetics for a genocide. I don't care what you claim to be. This is another problem that we have. People claim to be something, but you're clearly engaging in Nazi apologetics right now. You are shit. You
well,
are blame shifting all over the place, dude. They did a genocide.
yeah, I'm not denying that they did a genocide,
You're
but
saying they just
if you'll let
stumbled
me
into
talk,
it, like
no, my point was that I'm not saying it was the Poles. My point is that, you know, what later became the Allied powers kind of they wouldn't accept, for example, the Jewish refugees, right? They,
Why did they need
wouldn't
wait,
accept
Jewish refugees from where?
well, refugees is the wrong term. Sorry, live debate, but kind of the Jews
Where
Hitler was trying to remove from his
Oh,
country. He was
okay.
going to send them originally to Israel.
Why
And
why
to
are we talking
Madagascar. He wasn't trying to genocide them.
why are we talking about the other countries and not just the guy who tried to run all the Jewish people out of his country? This is why it feels like apologetics. You want to talk about all these well, why didn't these other countries take them? I don't know, but I do know that that's not worse than running them out of your country. One of those
America
things is
denied
significantly more worse.
Jews.
Yeah, we had Nazis here too. Henry Ford was a prominent Nazi.
Yeah, I
We got
know.
into
Hitler literally says he was the greatest American of
there you
all
go.
time in Mein Kampf.
We got into World War II late because we had so many Nazis on the right, kind of like we do now, that we were slow to get into World War II.
Well, they were slow to get into World War II because they'd been practicing isolationism for about like 100 years at that point. I mean, they were slow to get into World War One too. They only got in because they were attacked, like directly.
Yeah, well, sort of, right? Sort of. That's not why we went to. That's not why we went to Europe.
Well, we went to Europe because
not because of Japan, right? We didn't go to Europe because of what Japan did,
Japan
right?
Japan also attacked India and Indochina, which were at that time under.
Are those in Europe?
Well, they're not in Europe, but they were under European occupation. You do know Indochina, specifically Vietnam and Cambodia, were under French occupation at that time.
I understand, but again, I was just saying that the reason we were slow to go to Europe is because so many Americans sided with Hitler. This is a weird conversation. I'm just going to be honest. I think it's very strange that we are talking about everything but Germany right now. People wouldn't take refugees. Well, why were they refugees? Because the guy that German handed their power over to and said, go ahead and be an authoritarian, he's like, you know what? I'm going to get rid of these people. And if other countries aren't going to take him, well, then I guess we got to do what we got to do. That's essentially what you're saying, is that Hitler was left with no choice.
Because he wasn't. I mean, if you'd let me explain.
You always have a choice not to do a genocide. There's always a choice not to do a genocide.
Well, can I explain? Can I explain?
Well, are you going to, like, can you explain how somebody justifies a genocide?
Okay, sure. Let me explain, right? The US, for example, they refused to accept the kind of Jews that Hitler was trying to remove from his country. And you can say he had no choice but to do genocide. The Holocaust only began, and I'm not going to deny that 6 million died. I'm not going to deny it because I'm not a complete
That's
idiot,
nice.
Right?
That's nice. They're at least not all the other apologists.
That only began in 1941. What was going on before 1941? What started in 1941? The two-front war.
What are you saying? Again, you just said that you were going to explain to me that you were going to explain why like a genocide was necessary. You didn't have to run Jewish people out of the country. Are you saying that you agree with Hitler that the problems that were happening in Germany were because of Jewish people?
Can I explain?
I want to know. Well, I do need to know if you agree with that so that we can, because you're past that part now. So you agree with that? Okay. All right, so you're just saying, you just say
Jews had overrepresentation. Look,
brother.
Yes, the Jewish ethnicity had overrepresentation in, for example, the Weimar governments. They had overrepresentation in the Marxist movements that had kind of forced Weimar Germany into civil war. Bavaria for a time declared independence.
So should we?
This is mainstream.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think overrepresentation is justification for a genocide? Because if that's the case, we have an hold on. Let me finish. Because if that's the case, in America, we have an overrepresentation of white Christians in our government. So should we get rid of all of them because they're overrepresented?
Not representation, because I'm not interested in like egalitarianism. What I'm talking about is that the movements which would detriment. Look, I'm gay. I'm fine with like gay people. Like I'm gay myself. My boyfriend is Turkish, right? But the degenerate sexual stuff was being forced by Magnus Hirschfeld. He was Jewish.
Forced? How did he force it? He put people in a room and he at gunpoint and said, "You guys have to have sex with each other."
Well, he was, forcing kind of this, he implemented, and this is real, you can look this up, this is mainstream history. The Scientific American ran an article on this. He implemented this, like, deal with the Weimar police that would allow cross dressing if you had a certificate, because it was a crime at that
Who
time,
the
right?
fuck cares about cross dressing? Why would I care about that?
It destroys healthy, natural
Oh,
boundaries between
Jesus
male and
Christ. No, it
female.
doesn't. Toughen up. Toughen the fuck up. What are you talking about? It's clothes. Toughen the fuck up. You're now justifying a genocide because of cross dressing? Because a Jewish person was like, yeah, cross dressing's okay? Yeah, this
Like,
is why I don't like authoritarianism. This is exactly why. Because people like you wind up getting power and then they kill people. I think you've made my argument perfectly clear. I think everybody here now is like, oh, that's why we don't like authoritarianism. Your proof was that somebody was okay with cross dressing, and that's why you needed to
my
eliminate Jewish people.
if you look at it's not just like one Jew.
I don't
Okay,
even
look,
understand why you're laughing
when
right now. This is crazy. Why are you laughing at this? This is crazy.
because you seem to miss the overarching point and are focusing on this like one thing. Like, it's not just that like there was one Jew who was fine with cross-dressing. This guy had massive influence in the Weimar government and the banking sector, which had
Who cares?
sold
Wait,
German
what was he
industry
doing though?
overseas. The French government, which had imported into the Rhineland a bunch of, specifically, and again, this is mainstream history, they imported a bunch of African colonial soldiers to the
Yeah,
Rhineland
I don't care
who
about any.
then
I don't care
debauched
about.
German women,
Yeah,
who debauched
I
German
don't care
women.
about any of this. You are taking the actions of a Jewish person and ascribing them to Jewish
It's
people.
not one.
What? Excuse
It's
me. I let you go on for quite a while there. It was not. It's frankly, it's nonsense. You, if you had been in Hitler's Germany, you would have been exiled too. You would have been in Poland. You would have been in the concentration camps too. This is fucking sick. I don't. Honest to God, I don't believe that you're gay. I think that you're lying. I think that you're cosplaying. I think all of you guys do this. And I'm sorry that if you are
I
gay,
mean, you
and
want me to
I'm
send you?
sorry if you are
I
gay.
mean, what you
I'm
want me to send
sorry
you?
if you
You
are.
want me to send you my gay porn
Excuse me.
folder?
Excuse me. I'm sorry if you are gay and you're not cosplaying. I do feel bad about that. But if you are gay and you're supporting this, I don't even get it. Like, you think that you should be eliminated? I'm justifying Hitler because he eliminated people like me. If that's the case, that might be more sad. That's probably more sad than you cosplaying. But I really don't want to have this discussion anymore, if we're being honest. I didn't.
Right.
I appreciate you coming by, but I don't really want to do this anymore.
All right. See you,
All
man.
right, see ya. Jesus Christ.